Vesper's Host is the newest dungeon in Destiny 2, and as per usual, this dungeon brings with it an awesome suite of new weapons and some new gameplay mechanics to engage with. In this video, I'll guide you through the process of completing this dungeon both in a team and for those after that coveted solo flawless. There's a lot to this dungeon, so let's jump right in. Collect your quest from Spider and launch the dungeon. You'll find yourself at the space station already on a catwalk just outside the first encounter. Progress forward to find a dark room with boxes littered throughout. This room teaches us the first two mechanics of the dungeon, and if you're familiar with the Deepstone Crypt raid, these mechanics will look familiar. But function differently. Clear ads until you find both a yellow scanner buff and a red operator buff. They'll be attached to an enemy. Defeat them to collect the buff for yourself. Important to note that you can only hold a buff for 1 minute at a time. After that 1 minute timer is up, so too is your life. If you're solo, obviously you can only handle one buff at a time, which is where the terminal comes into play. These terminals hold the buffs for you, and there are a couple of these terminals meant to hold a couple of buffs, which may feel odd to those who are familiar with the Deepstone terminals, which can only hold one buff at a time. Not here. Multiple terminals for multiple buffs. A few of these terminals are also connected across rooms, which means you'll be able to place a buff in one room's terminal and collect it from a different room's terminal. You may notice some panels scattered across the room here. To open the door to the first encounter, you'll need to grab the scanner buff. Once you have it, you'll notice on your radar that there are yellow icons where the panels are. Getting near the panels will see the icons either switch from a yellow indicator to a solid white one, or disappear entirely. There will also be an audio cue to indicate this. Should the icon switch to a solid white, that means that this is the correct object, in this case, the correct panel. Once you've identified which panels you need to shoot, there should be 4 of them, you then need to use the operator buff to actually shoot and activate those panels. If you shoot the wrong panel, the operator will immediately die, a punishment which persists throughout the dungeon. Scan for the correct panels, then use the operator buff to shoot said panels. Then simply follow the path until you reach the first encounter. Set yourself up to deal with fallen mechs, as those will be the toughest enemies you'll face here. No bosses yet. Explosives always do well against them, so things like rockets, grenade launchers. Don't sleep on Grand Overture either. Take note of the 3 pathways in the 3 corners of the room. To progress the encounter, you'll need to go through each of them and complete some tasks. The order in which you do this does not matter, but keep in mind that the final one you do will spawn the toughest enemies in the center room. So you may want to take the pathway on the right side of the room last, as that's the easiest one and it'll give you a bit of an easier time dealing with the enemies. It's ultimately up to you though. Start the encounter by cycling the power in the middle of the room. Ads will spawn, dispose of them. After the mech is taken down, a ship will swing by and drop off a vandal with the scanner buff. Relieve him of that buff and take it for yourself, then head through one of the side pathways. Clear every enemy you see along the way, as their presence holds a force field up, blocking your path. Once you've dealt with them and opened the back room, you probably want to refresh your scanner buff, which can be done very simply by placing the buff in a terminal, then picking it right back up. You can do this with any buff, and if you're solo, you'll be doing this quite a bit. In this room, you'll see more panels, and you'll have to do the exact same thing we did in the opening section. Have a player with the scanner buff walk up to each panel, identifying which panels are active, marked as white on your radar. Once the panels are identified, you simply pick up an operator buff and shoot the correct panels. Once all the panels are shot, a nuke will spawn in a nearby deposit. Have all players dump their buffs into the terminals and carry the nuke back to the center room. The nuke is another common mechanic in the dungeon. The nuke can remain active for 60 seconds, after which it will wipe the team. Having a player hold the nuke will pause the timer, though it will also slowly give a stacking debuff on that player, Radiation. Radiation will kill any player should it reach 10 stacks, and will quickly dissipate if you're not holding a nuke. Players may freely drop the nuke, resuming its timer, though it may also be passed between players. Nukes also block your character's jump ability, so watch out for that. Make your way back to the main room with the nuke. There are buckets in the center of the room just behind the power button you use to start the encounter. The nuke needs to go into any of those buckets, but any mechs on the field will block the use of those buckets. Clear the mech out and drop the nuke in any bucket that's free, then simply rinse and repeat for the other 2 rooms. If you have multiple players, you can of course make things easier by splitting the workload, one on scanner, one on operator. The scanner can call out the panels as they see them, which means there may not be a need for specific panel callouts. If you're solo, juggling both buffs together, you're going to need to be able to identify and remember panels, which can result in some mental gymnastics to keep things in order. Whenever there are panels to shoot in this dungeon, there are always 4 panels to shoot. Knowing that may give some order to the mental chaos. This encounter is pretty simple, mostly designed as a way to get your team familiar with the majority of the mechanics in the dungeon. Take your time here and really understand what's going on. The only time you're on the clock is when there's a nuke, and even then you're able to pause the timer by simply having a player hold the nuke. This means that the only people that really should find issue with the timer are solo players, which is why I recommend taking the right side path last. Instead of making calculated jumps to get back to the middle room, the right side path is just a set of stairs. Stairs are easy. Once you've dumped the last nuke in the bucket, the encounter ends and you're rewarded with loot. Look towards the far right corner of the room to make your way further into the dungeon. On your way to the next encounter, you'll be met with a slight intermission. There will be a small labyrinth to go through. In this labyrinth, you'll need to manage power. Power can be gained by turning things off or closing doors, and expended by opening doors. You'll need to manage this power, which mostly boils down to closing doors behind you as you traverse. Fallen captains will also spawn, and defeating them causes them to drop a nuke. You'll need to take these nukes to the numbered buckets in ascending order. The first nuke goes in bucket 1, the second nuke goes in bucket 2, and so on. Honestly, this labyrinth is confusing the first couple of times you do it, but after that you'll notice that all you really have to do is go through the doors in the order in which you run across them. There's no timer here, and if you really want, you can leave the captain alive until you're ready for a nuke. So just take your time and familiarize yourself with the layout of the labyrinth. The giant servitor that's here is the main boss for the second encounter. This labyrinth will teach you that this servitor boss will occasionally attempt to integrate with you. Integration is simply a tether the boss will tie to you that will immediately down you should the timer reach 0. The way to get rid of the integration is to simply break line of sight. Put any object between you and the boss and the link will sever. This also works with a glacial grenade, if you want to get fancy with it. Honestly, the integration mechanic doesn't pose much of a threat. I think I've died to it maybe a single time, and that's just because I was goofing off. Get to the end of the path and drop down past the boss. There's not a lot of forks in the road, so simply take your time and enjoy the scenery. Encounter 2 is up next. This one does in fact have a boss fight. Any damage you can deal with big explosions are the best. Nova Bomb, Falling Star Missile, and Tether are great options, but also more unconventional setups work quite well too. The Stasis Titan Super, Ignitions, and even Parasite are all very helpful here as well. You'll see why when it comes time to damage the boss. This boss may also attempt to integrate with you during the encounter, but again, it's pretty simple to avoid dying to, just obstruct the boss's view of you with any object. Just ahead of the banner placement, you'll see numbered panels. There are 10 of these panels scattered across this wall, front and back. Start the encounter by walking towards the front of the room. The boss will appear in a slashed out section of the roof above you. Clear out the enemies until an operator spawns. Take it and deposit it within the terminal near the wall with all the panels. Once you've defeated enough enemies in the room, a bigger mini-boss will spawn. Defeating this mini-boss will teleport the team to the roof. Once you're up here, you'll want to take out all the shanks. Be cautious of the explosive ones. They seem a bit deadlier than a typical explosive shank. Once all the shanks are dead, an additional shank will spawn, this one carrying a blue buff named Suppressor. Take the Suppressor buff and notice that your grenade has been swapped with a new ability, one that drops a clone. Also notice that the boss is now glowing blue for the player with the Suppressor buff. Drop a clone near the boss, then shoot the clone to blow it up. If the boss gets caught in the blast radius, he will split apart into many smaller servitors, each with a unique number on their name tag. The objective then is to identify the 2 servitors in the group that glow a slightly blue shade and have glowing eyes. Find them and take note of the numbers they have in their name tag, then drop back downstairs and do it again. Clear enemies out until the mini-boss spawns, take down the mini-boss, clear out the shanks on the roof, use the suppressor clone to break the boss apart, then identify 2 more glowing servitors with 2 more unique numbers in their name tags. The second time you drop back down, the objective is simple. Grab Operator and shoot the 4 panels that have the numbers from the 4 glowing servitors. The order does not matter whatsoever, so shoot the 4 numbers in any order you'd like. Then the room will clear and you'll be left with 1 boss and 1 suppressor. Take the suppressor buff and use the clone to break apart the boss again, only now it's time to damage all the servitors in the group. This is why explosives are great here, anything that's going to allow you to deal high damage in a wide area against multiple enemies. The window for dealing damage is quite short, so launching a parasite and blasting a super right away is a pretty solid strategy here. Then it's just rinse and repeat. Clear the room, clear the roof, suppressor the boss, identify the numbers, do that one more time. Then shoot the 4 panels matching the 4 numbers on the glowing enemies, suppressor the boss again, damage. It's a very unique encounter with an even more unique boss. There's a lot of fun to be had here, and the mechanics are pretty light in this encounter, so it's a great way to familiarize yourself with Suppressor so we can put it all together in the final encounter. Collect your loot and hop up to the roof to progress. Again, the path forward is very linear, with the main goal being to not die from the orange electricity from above. This brings us to the final encounter, and this is where we're going to put everything we've learned thus far into practice all at once. For the boss, things with range are going to be your best friend. I found a lot of success with a lot of different things. Leviathan's Breath, Whisper of the Worm, Grand Overture, grenade launchers, they all work, though this boss will take you a long time to take down regardless of weaponry. Solo players, you're in for a rough time here. I'll have a dedicated section for solo players after discussing the mechanics here, as there's a lot to manage. Start the encounter by walking towards the far end of the room. Adds, a suppressor buff, and 2 new enemies will all spawn. These new enemies are puppets, and you'll notice they have an aura around them, which will apply radiation to any player near. Take the suppressor buff and use the clone's explosion to remove the aura from the puppets, making them vulnerable. The first 2 sets of puppets, once removed, will spawn a scanner buff. Have the player take the scanner buff, and in the center of the room, scan the 4 pillars, one of which will be active. The pillars all have a number, and the one that is active is the number you need. Once the second set of puppets is dealt with, Operator will spawn. Take the Operator buff and shoot all the panels with the same number as the active pillar you just scanned. If the active pillar you scanned has a 2, find and shoot all the panels with the number 2. Again, there will be 4 panels to shoot in total. They can be pretty well hidden, but it's something that'll get easier after you do it a couple of times. Once all 4 panels are shot, the boss will go downstairs. Drop all the buffs into any of the terminals and head into any of the chutes nearby. There are 2 major rooms down here, blue and orange, connected by a series of trapped pathways. Find the room in which the boss is present. Once you're there, grab the operator and shoot all 4 panels in the room. Again, they can be pretty well hidden, but thankfully there's no wrong panels and no particular order for them. Once the panels are shot, the boss will create 4 clones of herself. Grab the scanner and walk up to each clone to identify which one is the correct one. Destroy the correct clone and she will drop a nuke. Take this nuke to the radiation chamber within the room and dunk the bomb. Once you walk into a chamber, any buffs you have on you will be removed, and you'll have to get replacements from the center rooms, where the chutes are. You can avoid this by simply putting the buffs back before dealing with the nuke. Remember, nukes have a 1-minute timer, which, in this case, is more than enough time to put the buffs back in the terminals to preserve them. Once the chamber opens back up, simply repeat this process in the other room down here. Panels, scan, bomb, done. During all of this, more puppets will run around and try to annoy you. Killing them won't do much, as they'll simply be replaced with another puppet shortly after. The best way to deal with them is to remove their radiation with the suppression clone, and then leave them alone. This way they won't apply any radiation to anyone, which can help a lot. Ultimately though, they aren't important here, and if you simply want to ignore and avoid them, that's totally okay. Once you're done with the panels, scans, and bomb in the other room, it's time for damage, and for that, head back towards one of the middle rooms with the chutes, and walk into the center of the room, which will now teleport you back upstairs. From there, make sure you're locked and loaded, then walk into the big chute to begin damage phase. This is a grueling fight. The boss will be on the platform across from you, and it's your job to deal as much damage as you can. While that happens though, you'll be barraged with a seemingly infinite amount of orange electricity, which, if you've been hit by one thus far, you'll know is an instant death sentence. The best way to avoid these is to simply traverse the platform to the places that are safe. You can also jump into the air to avoid damage from the electricity, but you'll eventually need to come back down. This is a really tough damage encounter, and your best bet is to play it safe. Get some damage in where you can, and simply survive where you can't. A bit of time into this damage phase, the boss will spawn more puppets on the platform that you're on. Thankfully, none of these are irradiated, though attacking these puppets are important, as one will drop a nuke. You may have noticed the radiation chamber to your left, and you can probably guess that's where the nuke needs to go. Destroy the puppets, but you can leave the nuke on the ground for now. Once the boss fires a flare into the sky, the giant orange electric gateway thing in the background will pulse, and you'll need to grab the nuke and dunk it into the radiation chamber before that pulse reaches your team. The timing is pretty relaxed, but you'll still want to hustle. After the nuke is dunked, you'll get a couple second break before the chamber opens up, and you're able to engage in the second half of the damage phase. This is probably where most of your damage will be dealt. Staying in the radiation chamber can give you some safety from the orange electricity and incoming fire from the boss's clones. Once the boss fires another flare, it's time to head back into the big chute at the back of the platform and head back inside. Then it's simply rinse and repeat. Collect suppressor and take down the 2 sets of puppets. Use scanner on the 4 pillars to find the active number you need, then use operator to shoot the panels with that number around the room. Use any of the chutes to go downstairs, find the room with the boss, use operator to activate the 4 panels in that room, use scanner to find the correct clone of the boss, then take the nuke and deposit it into the chamber. Repeat that in the other room, then head up for damage. Deal damage to the boss until she spawns some puppets on the platform with you. Take down the puppets, wait until she fires a flare, then take the nuke into the chamber and deposit it. A bit more damage to the boss, then on the next flare, jump into the mega chute and do it all again until the boss is dead. Then just collect your loot and let out a massive sigh of relief. It's an incredibly intense fight, so make sure you've got some patience with you when you attempt this. Now, for my solo players out there, this is pure insanity. I went into this dungeon expecting another solo flawless under the belt, but boy was I mistaken. I did complete this dungeon solo, but it took a really long time. Most of that time, almost all of that time, was spent on this final boss. Lots of trial and error. The biggest tips I can give you solos out there is just to be patient, more so than usual. You're going to have to be on your A game for an extended period of time, so keeping your wits is vital. I went through a lot of different weapon loadouts in the final encounter, but the one I landed on was Vesper. It deals a solid amount of damage, and you won't likely run out of ammo on the roof, an issue I was running into with Leviathans. That being said, there are a lot of options for damage towards the boss. Supers can be very helpful and very safe. Vesper was quite good, Leviathans was also very easy damage, and even Grand Overture was dealing a pretty solid amount of damage. Just use whatever you're comfortable with. No matter what you decide to use, the boss will eat a lot of it, so just use something that works for you. The buffs aren't the tough part. Yeah, it's a lot of grab this buff, use it, put it back, grab this buff, use it, put it back, but after a couple of times, you'll get the groove for it. The big thing here is just survivability. You need healing. I ran the all reliable Lorelei here, and I can't imagine not having healing. I would recommend a Solar Warlock, and even an Invisibility Hunter could be pretty good, as you're able to grab and place buffs while invisible. As far as hardest parts for solos throughout the dungeon, the nuke timers can give you some trouble in the first encounter, the exploding shanks in the second encounter can be pretty brutal, and the damage phase and lightning strikes in the final encounter can really catch you off guard. I recommend safety first across the board. Invisibility, healing, and strong add clear weapons will serve you well, along with first-hand experience with the dungeon. I will likely go for another solo flawless attempt eventually, but right now it's a bit more tedious than fun for me. And that's pretty much all I have to say on the dungeon. It's probably Destiny's hardest dungeon, but many hands make light work, so having a couple of buddies with you makes it that much easier and more fun. If you have any questions about this dungeon, drop them down in the comments. I've been trying to learn the ins and outs of this dungeon in order to bring you the most accurate guide I can, but if I missed anything you want to know, let me know and I'll answer as soon as I can. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time.